That desperate call, coming through the static on December 5, 1945, was the start of the Bermuda Triangle's most famous and terrifying legend. 5 US Navy bombers, a crew of 14 men, just vanished. A little while later, a rescue plane sent to find them, carrying 13 crew members, also disappeared. 27 people, seemingly swallowed by the sky and the sea. For decades, this single event has been the cornerstone of a chilling idea, that in a patch of the Atlantic Ocean, the laws of our world just stop working. They call it the Devil's Triangle. But what if the greatest vanishing act wasn't the planes at all, but the truth itself? The Bermuda Triangle. Just the name conjures up images of spinning compasses, ghost ships drifting on the waves, and planes that fly into a cloud and are never seen again. It's this loosely defined patch of the North Atlantic, stretching from Florida, to Bermuda, to Puerto Rico. And here's the thing. It doesn't show up on any official world maps. To governments and geographers, it just doesn't exist. But in our minds, it's a place of deep and terrifying mystery. It's been called the graveyard of the Atlantic, where over 50 ships and 20 aircraft are said to have been lost under circumstances that just can't be explained. The stories are legendary. We're talking alien abductions, time portals, even leftover energy from the lost city of Atlantis. These are the kinds of stories pushed in sensational books and blockbuster movies for more than 50 years. They paint the triangle as a place that has authorities stumped, where science has no answers, and where something ancient and powerful is at play. We've all heard those stories. But tonight, we're not just retelling them. We are opening the original case files. We're going to look at the official reports, the naval records, and the eyewitness accounts that were filed away, collecting dust in archives. We're going to uncover what they really don't want you to know. Because the deepest secret of the Bermuda Triangle isn't about aliens or phantom forces. It's the story of how the legend was built, piece by piece, on a foundation of misdirection, exaggeration, and sometimes, straight-up lies. The "they" in this story aren't shadowy government agents. They are the myth-makers who sold the world a ghost story. And tonight, we pull back the curtain. Section 1. The birth of a legend deconstructing Flight 19. The story of Flight 19 is where the whole Bermuda Triangle myth really begins. It's the perfect case. A squadron of military planes, experienced pilots, and a disappearance so complete it seems to defy any rational explanation. Here's the popular version. On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for a routine training flight. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, was a seasoned combat pilot with thousands of hours of flight time. The weather was clear and calm. But about 90 minutes into the flight, the control tower got a disturbing message. Lieutenant Taylor sounded confused, disoriented. "Both my compasses are out," he reported. "I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I am over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." Over the next few hours, all the radio operators on the ground could do was listen, helpless, as the pilots got more and more lost. The squadron was flying aimlessly, first east, then north, deeper into the huge expanse of the Atlantic. Then, the final, chilling message before the radio went silent forever. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." And then, nothing. They were gone. But the tragedy wasn't over. A Martin Mariner PBM flying boat, one of 2 search planes sent to find them, also vanished from radar. Gone without a trace. The final count, 6 aircraft and 27 men. No wreckage, no bodies, no oil slicks. Just a gaping hole in reality. It's a perfect mystery, right? The official story, as myth-makers like to call it, blames pilot error and bad weather. But they insist this is just a cover-up. A simple explanation to hide a truth that's too bizarre to reveal. They point to the fact that the Navy's first investigation concluded the cause was unknown, before a higher-up overruled them and blamed Taylor. This, they claim, is the proof that evidence was buried. But when you actually dig into the Navy's investigation records, the real documents held at the National Archives, a different, much more human and tragic story comes out. And it's here, in these supposedly hidden files, that we find the first secret they don't want you to know. Nearly every key detail in the popular legend is either a huge exaggeration or just plain false. Let's open the file. First, the experienced pilot, Lieutenant Taylor. Yes, he was a veteran pilot, but he had just recently transferred to Fort Lauderdale from Miami. He didn't know the area well. More importantly, official records show he had a history of getting lost while flying. He'd had to be rescued twice before in the Pacific. He was a capable pilot, but he wasn't perfect. Now, what about the compasses? Taylor reported both of his were out. This is the central mystery. But he wasn't flying alone. He was leading 4 other student pilots. The radio transcripts show a critical detail that's almost always left out. Other pilots in the flight knew their compasses were working fine and tried to tell Taylor they should just fly west. One pilot even transmitted, "If we would just fly west, we would get home." But naval protocol was strict. Student pilots had to follow their leader, even if he was wrong. Taylor, tragically convinced he was over the Florida Keys in the Gulf of Mexico, ordered the flight northeast, thinking it would take them over the Florida Peninsula. Instead, he led them further and further out into the Atlantic. This wasn't something supernatural. It was a disoriented leader making a fatal mistake. And the clear and calm weather. This might be the most blatant distortion. Weather reports from that day, right there in the official naval investigation, show that while the flight took off in good weather, a violent and unexpected storm was kicking up over the Atlantic, exactly where they were headed. By the time they were lost, they were flying in high winds and rough seas, with the sun going down. The last rescue plane to get near their suspected location reported overcast skies, heavy showers, and very rough seas. They didn't vanish in a calm, myth makers, they flew straight into a tempest. So what about the vanished rescue plane, the Martin Mariner? This part is often held up as the final proof of some evil force. But the Martin Mariner had a well-known, grim nickname among Navy pilots, the flying gas tank. The plane was famous for being vulnerable to mid-air explosions from fuel vapor leaks. On the night it disappeared, the crew of a merchant ship, the SS Gaines Mills, reported seeing a massive explosion in the sky at 7:50 p.m. They went to the location and found a large oil slick and floating debris, right where the rescue plane had vanished from radar. The Mariner didn't vanish. It tragically exploded, a fate that happened to many others of its kind. Finally, that so-called cover-up. The Navy's first report did conclude the cause was causes or reasons unknown. This wasn't to hide anything. It was because without the planes or the bodies, they couldn't be 100% sure what happened. But Lieutenant Taylor's mother refused to let her son's name be blamed. She campaigned relentlessly, so, out of respect for her and the family, the Navy amended the finding. It was an act of compassion that was later twisted by writers into a sinister conspiracy. The buried truth was just the Navy trying to spare a grieving family more pain. The real architect of the modern myth was an author named Charles Berlitz. In his 1974 bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle, he took the story of Flight 19, stripped out all this critical context, the pilot's history, the other working compasses, the violent storm, the witnessed explosion of the Mariner, and presented the empty shell that was left as an unsolvable puzzle. He sold millions of books. And a legend was born. The secret was never buried at sea. It was buried in his bibliography. Section 2. The behemoth that disappeared. The case of the USS Cyclops. If Flight 19 is the origin story of the Triangle's legend, the disappearance of the USS Cyclops is its monster. This is a story so huge, so epic, that it just seems to defy all logic. Here's the story you've probably heard. In March of 1918, at the height of World War I, the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy collier ship, vanished. And this was no small boat. It was over 540 feet long, a behemoth of steel carrying 306 crew and passengers. It left Barbados on its way to Baltimore and simply sailed into thin air. The two details that really fuel the legend are the most unsettling. It sent no SOS call, and not a single piece of wreckage, not a life preserver, not a scrap of wood, not even an oil slick, has ever been found. The ship, and everyone on it, was just erased. President Woodrow Wilson himself said, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." The US Navy called it one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy. Theories ran wild. Was it sunk by a German U-boat? Captured? Or did it get taken down by a giant squid, as one magazine actually speculated? Modern myth makers, of course, point to only one culprit, the Triangle. They say there's no way a ship that big could disappear without a trace in supposedly calm weather. But once again, what they don't want you to know is that the case files tell a very different story. The secret of the Cyclops isn't about the paranormal. The secret is in the ship's design, its cargo, and the brutal reality of the ocean. Let's open the file on the USS Cyclops. First, the ship itself. It was massive, sure, but it had issues. The Cyclops had a single engine that, when it failed, made the ship unusable. It was also known to roll heavily even in just moderately rough seas. Even more critical, a design flaw in its class meant that its main support beams were prone to corrosion. In fact, two of its sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, later vanished in the exact same way during World War II, which makes a catastrophic structural failure seem pretty likely. Now, let's look at its last trip. The Cyclops was carrying 11,000 tons of manganese ore. This stuff is way denser and heavier than the coal it was designed to carry. An officer named Conrad Nervig, who was transferred off the ship right before its final voyage, later wrote that the manganese ore was probably loaded improperly, with all the weight concentrated in the middle of the ship. This would have put a huge amount of strain on the ship's weakest points. According to Nervig, the one officer on board who actually had experience loading manganese had been confined to his quarters by the captain over a trivial disagreement. And what about those calm seas it supposedly vanished in? That's a total fabrication. While the ship left Barbados in nice weather, its route took it straight into an area known for sudden, violent storms. Weather reports from the time confirm that a powerful storm, what some now call a nor'easter, was churning up the waters right in the Cyclops' path around the time it disappeared. So, picture this: a structurally weak, overloaded ship, top-heavy and prone to rolling, sails directly into a monster storm. The heavy cargo could have shifted, or the immense pressure from the waves could have caused the ship to just snap in two. A failure like that would have been instant. The ship could have plunged beneath the waves in minutes, way too fast for the crew to get to lifeboats or for the radio operator to tap out an SOS on 1918 equipment. It wasn't a slow sinking, it was a sudden, violent end. But what about the most compelling part? No wreckage. How does a 540-foot ship leave no trace? The answer is in two powerful forces: the Gulf Stream and the crushing depth of the ocean. The Gulf Stream is basically a giant, fast-moving river inside the ocean, and it can carry debris for hundreds of miles in a short time, scattering it far from any search area. On top of that, the area where the Cyclops is thought to have gone down includes the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest part of the entire Atlantic Ocean, over 27,000 feet deep. Any wreckage would have been scattered by the current and would now be buried under miles of water, far beyond what any 1918 search party could find. The pattern is pretty clear. Just like with Flight 19, the story of the USS Cyclops isn't a paranormal mystery. It's a tragedy of explainable things: a flawed ship, a dangerous cargo, a violent storm, and an unforgiving sea. These boring facts were just ignored by storytellers who like the sound of impossible vanishings and supernatural forces a lot better. We've just taken apart the two biggest myths of the Bermuda Triangle, using the very records that were supposed to be hidden. But that leaves the question: why was this legend even created? And what other mysteries fall apart when you actually look at them? If you're enjoying this deep dive and want to keep separating fact from fiction, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and make sure to click the notification bell. We have a lot more secrets to uncover. Now, let's talk about the so-called science they love to ignore. Section 3: The Science of the Supernatural. When the stories of aliens and Atlantis start to sound a little too crazy, defenders of the Bermuda Triangle myth often switch to more scientific-sounding theories. They pitch these ideas as cutting-edge explanations that mainstream science is too scared to touch. Let's look at the three most popular ones: electronic fog, methane gas eruptions, and magnetic anomalies. First up, electronic fog. This is something described by a few private pilots as a weird, thick, grey-green fog that shows up out of nowhere. Inside it, they say compasses spin like crazy and electronics fail. It sounds terrifying and is often used to explain why pilots get disoriented. But here's the thing: electronic fog is not a real meteorological phenomenon. It has never been documented or studied by scientists. It only exists in stories, mostly told by people who've written books about the triangle. It's a great plot device, but it has no basis in actual science. Next is the methane hydrates theory. This is one of the most popular, science-y, explanations. The idea is that huge fields of frozen methane gas are trapped on the ocean floor. If a pocket of this gas were to burst, it would create a massive plume of bubbles that would dramatically lower the density of the water. Any ship passing over it would lose all buoyancy and sink like a rock, with no time to send an SOS. It's a scary and slick theory. There's just one problem: there's no evidence for it. The United States Geological Survey has studied the seafloor in this area extensively and says there's no evidence of a major methane gas release in the Bermuda Triangle for at least the last 15,000 years. It's a cool idea for a TV show, but it just doesn't match the geological facts. Finally, we have the magnetic anomalies. This is the one theory that actually has a tiny grain of truth. The Bermuda Triangle is one of only 2 places on Earth where a magnetic compass sometimes points to true north instead of magnetic north. This is a known, predictable geographic thing called agonic line variation. For a navigator who isn't prepared for it, this could definitely cause confusion and lead to major navigational mistakes. But this isn't some mysterious, unpredictable force. It's a basic part of navigation that professional pilots and sailors are trained to handle. It can get you lost, but it doesn't make engines fail or planes fall out of the sky. So if these sensational theories don't hold up, what are the real forces at work in this part of the ocean? The truth is, the Bermuda Triangle is home to some of the most powerful and dangerous natural phenomena on Earth. These are the real sea monsters. First, you have rogue waves. For centuries, people thought these were just sailors' tall tales, a single, vertical wall of water, sometimes 100 feet high, that appears out of nowhere in the open ocean. But in recent decades, satellite tech has proven they are very, very real. Oceanographer Dr. Simon Boxall explains that this region is a perfect factory for them, as storms coming from different directions can cause wave systems to combine. When multiple wave peaks line up just right, they can create a monstrous, ship-breaking wave that could sink something as huge as the USS Cyclops in minutes, leaving almost no trace. And then you've got the 1-2 punch of the Gulf Stream and extreme weather. The Gulf Stream is a powerful current moving at around 4 to 5 miles per hour, acting like a conveyor belt that can quickly sweep wreckage far away from a crash site, making it incredibly hard to find. This area is also a breeding ground for sudden, violent thunderstorms and is basically a highway for hurricanes. Most Atlantic tropical storms pass right through here. Back before modern weather forecasting, a ship or plane could easily get caught off guard by a storm that seemed to appear out of nowhere. When you combine the potential for human error, violent and unpredictable weather, the navigational challenge of the agonic line, the sheer power of rogue waves, and a current that hides the evidence, you don't need aliens or time portals to explain the disappearances. You have a perfect storm of natural causes. So, after digging through the archives and debunking the pseudoscience, what is the great secret of the Bermuda Triangle? What is it that they really don't want you to know? The secret is this: there is no mystery. The US Navy, the US Coast Guard, and major insurance companies like Lloyd's of London all say the same thing. The number of disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle isn't statistically any higher than in any other busy part of the ocean. The legend is a manufactured one. It was created and kept alive by writers who, whether they meant to or not, used bad reasoning, sensationalism, and a total disregard for the facts. A researcher named Larry Cush proved this back in 1975. For his book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved, he did what the mythmakers never bothered to do. He went back to the original sources. He read the old Navy reports, the newspaper articles from the time, and the weather data. He found that stories were routinely blown out of proportion. Ships that supposedly vanished in calm seas had actually sailed into hurricanes. Vessels that disappeared had, in fact, been reported as arriving safely at their destination, a small detail the storytellers just decided to leave out. He discovered that the entire legend was a house of cards. So, the real conspiracy isn't a government hiding aliens. The conspiracy is a group of authors and TV producers who have been selling a lie for decades because the mystery is more profitable than the truth. They don't want you to know that the answers have been sitting in public records all along. They don't want you to know that the Bermuda Triangle is just a place where the forces of nature and human error collide, exactly like everywhere else on the planet. The most enduring mystery of the Bermuda Triangle isn't why so many have disappeared, but why we, as an audience, wanted so badly to believe the ghost story instead of the facts. Maybe it's because we want to believe that there are still places on our maps marked, "Here be dragons." The next time you hear a tale of a plane vanishing into thin air, ask yourself, are you hearing the whole story, or just the parts they want you to read? What do you think? Was the legend a deliberate scam, or just a good story that got out of hand? Let me know your theory in the comments below.